Well, I think we'd all agree that college football has been pretty top-heavy lately, right? The same list of usual suspects at the end of the season, either making the playoffs or a strong chance to make it heading into the last weekend or two of the season, right? Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, but Georgia, Notre Dame has gotten in once and been close a couple other times. It seems to be the same list of teams almost year in and year out. But one of the reasons we love college football, and that list of reasons is a mile long, but one of the reasons we all love college football so much, upsets, right? Yes, the favorite is going to win most of the time. That's why they're the favorite, no matter what sport you're talking about. But we love upsets in all sports, and we get plenty of them in college football. And the team that you think is going to win a conference at the beginning of the season isn't always the team that ends up winning it, right? I think everyone would agree that Ohio State's going to be the favorite heading into the 2020 season out of the Big Ten. And I've really got no argument with that. But I've been talking about Penn State's 2020 season for a couple of years now. I think this has a chance to be a special season for Penn State. Clearly, they're going to have to get over the hump known as Ohio State within their own division. Can they do it? We're going to try to find out in today's video when I give you a preview and a game-by-game prediction for the 2020 Penn State Nittany Lions. Let's go! Hey, good morning, Internet. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And two, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Sometimes they're even watchable, and I have a feeling, a strong feeling, especially if you're a Penn State fan, you're going to find this video extremely watchable. Share this video somewhere if you like it, or pick out one of the other preview and prediction videos that I've done. I'll put a link to all of them up here. I'm trying to get to 40,000 subscribers by the time the season starts. Now, that's a very lofty goal and expectation, and I may not hit it, but I definitely won't hit it without you guys' help. So thumbs up the video, share it somewhere, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the case may be. Try to help Uncle Lou out. Thank you. All right, Penn State 2020. Kyle T., this video is for you, sir. You requested a Penn State preview and prediction over on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. If you're a Patreon member, make sure you check out the page. I did my yearly Patreon update sometime in the last couple of days. So a few things over there have changed. I've added a new tier over there. So anyway, just make sure you check it out. If you're not on the Patreon page yet and you'd like to consider joining, just hit the description in the just hit the link in the description of this video that says support the channel and join the Patreon page. It'll take you over there. You get all kinds of benefits, perks, and rewards for signing up on the Uncle Lou Patreon page. And it's a huge help to me and a big support for what we're doing here on the channel. All right, here we go, Penn State. And yes, I've got my copious notes here. And like I mentioned at the top, I've been talking about Penn State and the 2020 season in particular for a couple of years now. Not that I didn't think they were going to be good last year or the year before, but if you just sort of looked at the way their recruiting was set up, it looked like 2020 had a chance to be a really special year for Penn State. And after sitting down and studying Penn State for a couple hours this morning, nothing has changed my mind. Now, the question about Penn State is going to be, can they get over the hump and win the Big Ten East? A very tough division, probably the second toughest division in football, maybe the third. But nevertheless, a very tough division. And, of course, Ohio State looms large in that division. Let's take a look at Penn State here. Of course, James Franklin, head coach, came from Vandy, right? More on that in a second. 10-2 last year in the regular season, 11-2 after beating Memphis in the Cotton Bowl. Let's look at what James Franklin's done since he got to Penn State. And you have to remember, when James Franklin got to Penn State, they were at one of their lowest points in program history. They were really starting to come up out of the whole Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno fiasco involving some very heinous activity. There's no other way to say it, involving some younger kids that was going on there. So he inherited a tough situation. They were still on a bowl ban when he got there. They were still suffering with some scholarship restrictions when he got there. Let's see what he was able to do. Well, he went 7-5 his first year. They were not eligible for a bowl game. They went 7-6 their second year. He then went 11-3. That was the year they actually didn't they win the Big Ten that year? Yeah, they won the Big Ten that year, beating Wisconsin, but then lost the Rose Bowl to Southern Cal. Probably his best year so far, that 11-3 season. Followed that up with an 11-2 season. Then sort of a step back with a 9-4 season before rebounding last year, like I mentioned, to 10-2, 11-2 after the bowl win. Pretty good run so far for James Franklin. But I want to talk about how he got the job at Penn State. Now, not a lot of people wanted that job at the time, right? If you remember with Jerry Sandusky thing, the whole deal. He was at Vandy when that was going on. Now, if you know anything at all about college football, Vandy is one of the hardest places to win in the Power Five. I mean, there's a list of schools who have some built-in and inherent disadvantages when it comes to competing at a high level in football. Vandy is at or near the top of that list. He was there for 3 years. Now, in his first year, 6-win season. His second year, 9 wins at Vandy. His third season, 9 wins again. So it was not a fluke. Back-to-back 9-win seasons at Vandy. Now, that is nothing short of miraculous. Now, I could go back 100 years, but what I've decided to do, Vandy's win total the first 2 years after he left and the 2 years before he got there. All right, keep in mind, he won 9 games 2 years in a row. The 2 years before he got there, a 2-win season and a 2-win season. The 2 years after he left, a 3-win season and a 4-win season. Sandwiched in between there, back-to-back 9-win seasons for James Franklin. The guy is a hell of a coach, and that's showing at Penn State. Again, he took over. I know it's Penn State. They're a traditional power. They've been around a long time. They've been good for a long, long time. When he took that job over, there might not have been a difficult job to take in all of Power 5 football, considering the things that had gone on there the previous few years. And just again, 7 wins, 7 wins, 11 wins, 11 wins, 9 wins, and then 11 wins last year. James Franklin is the real deal. I don't see how anybody can doubt James Franklin's ability to coach. Nothing short of miraculous, in my opinion. Let's look at recruiting. I like to do this with every single team. I like to look at the last 4 years worth of recruiting classes. That's what primarily makes up a team's roster. Now, I know you got players that leave early for the NFL. You've got players that transfer in. You've got players that transfer out. And a player's recruiting ranking doesn't always equal his production once he gets to college. I understand all that. But still, I think if you look at the last 4 recruiting classes, it gives you an idea of the overall talent on the team that a coach has to work with. So we'll start with the most recent recruiting class, 2020, 14th in the nation, 3rd in the Big Ten. 2019, 12th in the nation, 2nd in the Big Ten. 2018, 6th in the nation, 2nd in the Big Ten. 2017, 15th in the nation, 3rd in the Big Ten. So top 3 in the Big Ten every single year, top 2 at twice, and then top 20 classes every single year, top 15 classes every single year, and 1 top 10 class, that being the 6th ranked class in 18. So a lot of talent to work with at Penn State on this year's team. Let's take a look at their offense. What they lose last year, what's coming back, what might look different for 2020. Let's talk about the passing game. It was terrible last year. Let's just be real. I think it was 8th in the Big Ten. They did not have a good year passing the ball. That's something they're going to have to get better at in 2020 if they're going to win that division. 2 or 3 losses is not going to win that division. 1 loss, maybe, depending on who it's to. 2 losses, probably not. You know, if you lose 2 Big Ten games, Penn State, Ohio State would have to lose 3 Big Ten games. That's probably not going to happen. So you're going to have to throw the ball, win some games. You got to improve on that. 8th in the Big Ten in passing, not impressive. That's got to get better. In order to help that happen, they bring in a new offensive coordinator. This guy came over from Minnesota, Kirk. I can't even say this guy's last name. Sorakakow, whatever the hell that is. Now, you do return 8 starters on offense. That's the good news. You have to assume those 8 players are going to be all a little bit better than they were last year. I mean, generally speaking, that's how it works. You tend to get better at least a little bit, sometimes a lot, year over year. If nothing else, you've got a whole another year's worth of experience this year out of those 8 players than you had the year before. 36 points per game. So even though they struggled throwing the ball, they did not struggle scoring. 36 points per game is pretty good. I don't care who you are. If you're scoring 36 points per game, you're going to win a lot of games. Well, maybe unless you're in the Big 12 where they don't play any defense and literally everybody scores 40 points a game, but I digress. Quarterback comes back, Sean Clifford. Again, he's got to get better through the air. He's a dual threat quarterback, had 255 yards of total offense per game last year, which I believe was good for 2nd or 3rd in the Big Ten. So again, he's productive, but I think right now, at least when you look at last year, He was more productive running the ball than he was throwing the ball, and that's something that's got to get better. The throwing has got to improve at Penn State in 2020 if they want to get where they want to go. At running back, you return Journey Brown. He'll be a junior this year. He closed out the season really strong last year. Maybe not all that great or all that consistent over the course of the entire year, particularly the first half of the year. But if you look at the second half of the year, 4 of the last 5 games, he had over 100 yards. And in the bowl game against Memphis, I think he went for like 205 yards, something like that. So he really exploded in that last game. He needs to keep up that sort of production. A great running game is going to help a passing game. It always does. But he's back. Offensive line, you return 5 players with starting experience. You return both your starting tackles, you return your center, and you return a right guard. But you played 2 different right guards last year. They both come back. One's going to stay at right guard. The other one's probably going to end up switching to left guard. So 5 starters return with starting experience. Offensive line should be a strong suit for Penn State in 2020. Wide receiver, to me, probably the biggest concern on your entire team. You have 6 freshmen or redshirt freshmen. They're probably all going to play. Outside of that, the only guy you return with any serious or meaningful experience is this Jahan Dotson, right? And he hasn't exactly been setting the world on fire. His totals over the last 2 seasons are 40 catches, 691 yards. Again, that's a total for the last 2 seasons. So you don't really have an established go-to wide receiver, a game-breaking wide receiver that you can count on and rely on. Now, again, you've recruited very well. You've got some talent and some skill at the wide receiver position with those freshmen and redshirt freshmen, but none that have ever really proved it on the field. You've got to hope that at least one of those guys becomes the go-to guy. And you 6 possibilities there. You got to find the 1 or 2 that work out for you. If you do, that again will go a long way towards helping your passing game in 2020. Something else that'll help your passing game in 2020 is the return of tight end Freiermuth. This guy is one of the best tight ends in all of America. You got Brevin Jordan down at Miami. You got this guy. You couple other tight ends spread out across the Power 5. None better than Freiermuth. Brevin Jordan maybe just as good or whatever. But in any case, this guy is in the elite tier when it comes to tight ends. 15 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons, tied a school record. A reliable guy, hands like glue, somebody you can rely on, particularly on 3rd downs. A good, big, solid tight end that you can trust can be a quarterback's best friend. Sean Clifford should rely on that this year to help improve that passing game. Now let's look over on the defensive side of the ball for Penn State 2020 and do the same thing. You keep your coordinator, but you got several new position coaches, several new assistant coaches over there, and you only return 5 starters on that side of the ball. So more turnover on defense in 2020 than on offense. You do return a defensive end and a defensive tackle that I think have the potential to be really, really good this year. At defensive end, you got Shaka Toney, and at defensive tackle, Antonio Shelton. Both of these guys could be really, really good in 2020. Outside linebacker, you lose 2 starters from your linebacker core, but you return who I think could be the best player on defense in the Big Ten in 2020 and linebacker Micah Parsons. This guy is an absolute beast. An absolute animal. Could be the closest thing to Chase Young we see in the Big Ten this year. This guy was absolutely unbelievable last year as a sophomore. He led the team in tackles. I think he had 109. All-American. The guy can do it all. He stays on the field the entire game. Definitely your leader, the captain, the quarterback of the defense, whatever you want to call it. And you'll be relying on him even more this year with the departure of those other 2 linebackers. He could have an absolute monstrous season at linebacker. What else here? Brandon Smith, highest rated 2019 recruit. He's probably going to start at one of the outside linebacker positions. See what's going on the other side. Cornerback, safety, your defensive backs, 2 starters return to the defensive backfield. You get Tariq Castro Fields, I believe is his name, at one cornerback position, and at safety, Lamont Wade, I think is his name. You got to find replacements for the other 2 or 3 spots in the defensive backfield. And just like with your offense, you struggled throwing the ball. The Achilles heel of Penn State defensively last year was the pass defense. That's the area on defense that has got to get a whole lot better in 2020 than it was in 2019 when you get ready to play a team like an Ohio State that has a Heisman favorite, really, at quarterback in Justin Fields, the 2nd or 3rd best quarterback in all of college football, depending on who you ask. He's at the top or near the top of every Heisman board, 50 touchdowns last year, 4,000 total yards. He can sling it all over the field. Plus, he can hurt you with your legs. But as far as what we're talking about here, you got to get better defensively against the pass in 2020. You need improved play out of your secondary. It was your biggest weakness last year on defense by far. With 2 starters returning, you got some work to do over there. Shortened offseason, no spring ball, shortened, condensed, and limited offseason program. That's going to hurt Penn State in their passing game on offense with all those young wide receivers, and in their pass defense on the defensive side of the ball, trying to replace those 2 starters. But Penn State, of course, not the only team suffering because of the shortened practice we had leading up to the season with no spring ball and all that. Literally every team is dealing with that. So there it is. That's what you look like on offense and defense. I'm going to put the schedule up on the screen now. We're going to go through it, and I'm going to see what kind of season we can expect for Penn State in 2020. All right, you start off with 3 non-con games in a row this year, 2 of them at home, 1 on the road, and the 1 road game is the 1 Power 5 opponent. But you start out at home against Kent State. That should be a win. Shout out to Lou Saban, who I believe played and graduated from Kent State. You'll win. You'll beat Kent State. Maybe a chance to work out some kinks, iron out the wrinkles, that kind of thing. Yeah, shortened off-season program, no spring practice. Week 1 will be a good opportunity to get out on the field in live action and see what you're working with. Maybe make some changes heading into your week 2 game on the road at Virginia Tech. I do not think this will be an easy game. I think Virginia Tech is a good team in the ACC. Are they great? No, there are no great teams in the ACC not named Clemson, but they're good. Nevertheless, I think Penn State is better. Other than the fact that this is a road game at a pretty difficult place to play, I would pick Penn State without even having to think about it. You definitely can't sleep on this one. This isn't one you want to overlook. I've got you winning on the road against Virginia Tech and Blacksburg, but this isn't one you want to overlook here. This could be a close game, maybe late into the second half. I think you find a way to win. You're 2-0. Week 3, you come back home and you play San Jose State. Maybe. San Jose State is a part of the California university system that has basically suspended fall classes and things like that. It just looks like they may not have a season. So that's something to keep an eye on. If you play them, you'll beat them. You're 3-0. Then we got Northwestern, your first conference game. You get this at home. Northwestern was a disappointing team to me last year. Not that they're ever really great, but Pat Fitzgerald's been there a long time. He played there. Of course, now the head coach there. One of these guys, this is kind of an overused expression, I guess, but he gets the most out of the talent that he's able to get. But he does. Typically, they're a pretty good team. That wasn't the case last year. We'll see how much they can improve in 2020, but I don't think they can improve enough to compete with Penn State. I think you beat them, no problem. You're 4-0, 1-0 in the conference. And then you got one of your toughest games of the year, probably your toughest road game for sure, at Michigan. Michigan's a tough team to figure out. It seems like their defense pretty good, offense non-existent. Harbaugh, been a head coach forever, can't win a division, can't beat his rival in Ohio State. We know all those sorts of things. When I was talking about your recruiting classes within the Big Ten being second and third every single year, the years that you were second, Ohio State was first, Michigan was third. The year that you were third, Michigan was second. So they're right there with you in terms of overall roster talent, top to bottom. I believe James Franklin is a better coach than Jim Harbaugh. And more importantly, I believe in 2020, you're a better team than Michigan. This is a game that Penn State has to win, in my opinion. If you can't beat Michigan, even though it's on the road, that drastically reduces your chances of beating a team like Ohio State, in my mind, because I think Ohio State is miles ahead of Michigan right now. I think this is the point in the season where people are going to really start paying attention to Penn State. Now, I think you'll be a top 10 team even heading into the season. Preseason top 10, I think you're that good. But in terms of the casual fan and sort of their overall impressions of Penn State, I'm not sure how many people are going to be taking Penn State serious before this Michigan game. I think a lot more people will be taking you seriously after the game. When you go into the big house and not only beat Michigan, I think you beat them bad. I know you've struggled on the road with Michigan maybe a little bit over the last few years. I don't see that happening this year. I think this is a statement game for Penn State. I think you make that statement. I think you beat them and beat them bad. That takes you into your bye week. Now, this is a good place for your bye week because the next 3 games on your schedule potentially could all be losses. Not that you'll lose all 3. You're too good to lose all 3. But I think all 3 of these next games are potential losses. I wouldn't be surprised if you lost any one or honestly two of the next 3 games. First one after the bye week, at home against Iowa. Iowa's a team, they love to play these low-scoring defensive games, try to keep the opponent off the field offensively, sort of a keep-away approach, slow everything down. They beat Minnesota at home last year, right after Minnesota beat you in sort of their statement game. I like that you have the bye week before this one. I'm going to give you the win at home against Iowa. I'm not sure Iowa's going to be as good this year as they were even last year. They may take a step or two back. I'm going to give you the win at home against Iowa. Now, let's skip Ohio State for a second and go to this road game at Indiana. I haven't done an Indiana preview yet, but I've previewed a couple of teams who play Indiana. Indiana can be a tricky team. Maybe they beat somebody they're not supposed to beat this year, and you got to play them there. Depending on how the Ohio State game goes, could affect this game at Indiana. We see teams a lot of times lose to an inferior team the week after playing a really good team, especially if it's a rivalry game. Not that Penn State and Ohio State are a huge, 100-year-old rivalry or anything like that, but these are 2 top 10s within the same division in Power 5 football. It's developing into a little bit of a rivalry, at least right now in my mind. So it could make this game at Indiana tricky. I just think you're so much better than Indiana, and I believe in James Franklin as a head coach so much. I don't think he's going to let that happen, whether you win or lose to Ohio State. I've got you winning on the road at Indiana. Now let's go back to Ohio State. You get them at home. That's an obvious benefit and advantage. I'm assuming this will be a night game. For the purposes of these videos, and this is important, for the purposes of these videos, I have to assume that these games are going to be played as normal. That means a full house in Happy Valley, right? The stadium packed. I fully understand that we may be staring down the barrel of the weirdest college football season we've ever seen, where we may see stadiums half full, a third full, or even no fans allowed at some points throughout the season. And if that's the case, it would alter a lot of the predictions that I have been making on these videos. But I'm not going to do an entire set of videos taking every hypothetical into account. It would just be impossible. So for the purposes of all these videos I'm doing, I have been acting as though the season is going to go off as normal. So I'm going to assume you host Ohio State at night with a full stadium. I think Ohio State is the better team. I think they will have slightly better players. Justin Fields, I think, is the best or second best quarterback in all of college football. Ohio State is loaded at all 3 levels on defense. Yes, they lose Chase Young. Don't feel sorry for Ohio State. They're loaded on defense. Multiple NFL wide receivers. They have a great offensive line. Running back situation, they took a hit losing their top running back from last year, but they bring transfer Trey Sermon in from Oklahoma. They've got a couple of guys that, if not great, are both really, really good with potential to be great. They're just loaded everywhere. I do think they're the better team from top to bottom. Coaching, Ryan Day had a successful first year as a head coach after learning under Urban Meyer for all those years. He steps in, he takes over the roster as Urban Meyer left it to him at Ohio State. They go 12-0 in the regular season. They were never really tested, and they lost a close game to Clemson in the first round of the playoffs. Could they repeat that this year? Of course they could. These are clearly, to me, the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. I just have a feeling you beat them at home. Again, given that we have a normal season with a full stadium, this will be one of those whiteout situations. I think this will be a great game, and nothing will surprise me in this game. I've seen Penn State show up and lay some eggs in some big games. I've seen Penn State lose some close ones. I've seen them win some close ones. I've seen them blow some teams out in these situations. Ohio State is an amazing team, and if there's any Ohio State fans watching, I hope you're not mad at me. You could easily win this game. I've been talking about this Penn State team for a couple of years. I'm a believer in 2020 Penn State. I can't talk like that for 2 years and then pick you to lose again to Ohio State. I'm going to pick you to beat the Buckeyes, win at home. You're undefeated. I already mentioned you win at Indiana. Back-to-back road games, though, at Indiana and at Nebraska. Now, luckily, Scott Frost has not done at Nebraska what people thought he was going to do. Last year was the year people were pointing to, year 2 there. Adrian Martinez, year 2, Heisman candidate heading into the season. They were absolutely terrible. There's just no other way to describe Nebraska last year. A huge disappointment in year 2 under Scott Frost. That has really tamped down expectations for year 3, I think. Now, will they be better finally in year 3 under Scott Frost? Probably. I can't imagine they'll be as bad as they were the first 2 years. I don't think it matters. I think you beat them. I think you win both these road games here at Indiana and at Nebraska. You're on a roll. Then you host Michigan State, brand new coaching staff, another team that's been a little bit disappointing offensively over the last couple of years. Them and Michigan are a lot alike. Michigan State has an amazing defense too, I think. At least they did last year. I like their head coach, but he's taken a huge step up in competition from where he was at to where he is now. I don't think they can compete with you. I think you beat Michigan State. Home against Maryland. Maryland is another. There's 3 teams in the Big Ten this year that interest me that I don't think are great. I talked about one already, Indiana. The other one is Purdue. The third one I would put in that category would be Maryland. I think all 3 of those teams are capable of upsetting one of the big boys within the Big Ten. Maryland in particular has some interesting pieces to work with. Their head coach seems to be ahead of schedule there. Their offense looked unbelievable at times last year, non-existent at others. And you see that a lot from teams that have talented pieces but aren't talented top to bottom. Inconsistency. We saw that from Maryland last year. Would they be a little bit less inconsistent this year? Maybe. I don't think they're beating you, though. I think you beat Maryland. You're sitting at 11-0, which means you're 12-0 because your last game of the year is on the road at Rutgers. Doesn't matter that it's at Rutgers. You could play them in a Big Lots parking lot. It would make no difference. You could play them inside of a dollar store. It just doesn't matter. You're going to beat the bejesus out of Rutgers. It doesn't matter what your record is, where the game is played, or where it falls on the schedule. You're going to beat them. So I don't know what to say here. Penn State, I rarely do this. In fact, I try to find losses on every single schedule I do. Only one time in the history of this channel have I even predicted my Georgia Bulldogs to go 12-0. Only once. Only a couple of times have I predicted teams like Alabama or Clemson to go undefeated. I rarely do it. And I'm not very confident in my pick here of Penn State going 12-0. The Ohio State game is clearly the easiest one to point to say that would be a loss, right? That's the best team you're going to play. Clearly. They'll probably be favored over you in that game, honestly, unless they just look terrible the first half of the season, which I don't think anyone expects. I think on the road at Michigan potentially is a game you could lose. There's 3 stretch, Iowa, Ohio State, and at Indiana 3 weeks in a row, I think is a tough 3-game stretch. Back-to-back road games at Indiana, at Nebraska. So there's lots of places on here where Penn State could stumble and fall. And I'm not the type of guy that tries to find reasons that a team can go 12-0. I usually try to find reasons why they can't. I'm high on Penn State. I think Sean Clifford's going to have his best year yet. I'm a believer in the Penn State offense turning around this year. I do think Micah Parsons is one of the best defensive players in America and definitely has potential to be the best defensive player within the Big Ten. I think you're going to make improvements throwing the ball and defending the throw defensively. I think you can run the table. That's the good news. The bad news is if I'm wrong and your only loss is to Ohio State, you're probably not even going to win the division. I'm going to say this, too. It's very possible we see 2 playoff teams from the Big Ten East, Ohio State and Penn State. Whoever loses that Ohio State-Penn State game, if that's their only loss, they're going to have a strong case to make for that number 4 spot at the end of the season, heading into the college football playoffs. Now, I don't want to get ahead here. A lot of that depends on what happens within all the other conferences. How many undefeated conference champions do you have? Does the SEC have a 1-loss non-conference champion? And so you're sort of comparing, you're in a situation where somebody's going to get 2 teams in and you're comparing, let's say, a 1-loss Alabama or Georgia who didn't win the SEC versus a 1-loss Ohio State or Penn State who didn't win the Big Ten. If that happens, who knows who would get the edge? Probably the SEC. But I think the Big Ten, like I mentioned at the top, the Big Ten East is clearly, I think, the second best division, no worse than the third best division in all of college football. And if somebody makes it through there at 11-1 and doesn't win the division, that's still a hell of a season. But I've got Penn State going 12-0. Shout out to James Franklin. Shout out to Micah Parsons. I'm a huge Micah Parsons fan. I do, like I said, I'm going to love watching him play this year. I can't wait to watch that Penn State-Ohio State game just because I think it's going to be one of the best games of the year. Clearly, I hope we have a regular college football season that goes off without a hitch. There's nothing like watching a game at Penn State at night with the whiteout, a huge top 10, probably a top 5 matchup at that point in the season. I can't wait to see it. Anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. Have a good morning.